Have you ever said yes to something you really didn't want to say yes to? We all have. But today I'd love to talk to you and encourage you to work on saying yes only to doing those things that bring you joy, and then learn how to say no to everything else. Hi, I'm Diane LaFoon, and I'm here with your joy tip of the week. Give me a thumbs up or a heart or whatever if you've ever regretted saying yes to something you didn't want to do. It's something we've all done. And I have to be honest, I tend to be a people pleaser. And so this is a lesson that I have had to learn over and over and over too. It's been a very challenging process to learn. But I've got 5 tips for you today on learning how to say no and when to say no too. So I still don't get it right every time, I have to tell you, but with practice and with a conscious effort, you can get there. And it is a bit easier to say no each time you make that decision and choose to say no to something that doesn't bring you joy. So one time that I remember I was glad I knew how to say no and did it quickly was a trip that my niece and I took. We in 2018, in the summer of 2018, we had this blessing that she and I got to go on a trip and travel around Europe. And we were in Milan, and we were headed to the Duomo, or the cathedral. And in front of the cathedral was this great big piazza, this great big like a square, and it was just full of people milling around and everything. And she and I were walking towards the Duomo, and some men that were very big men, and they were a little daunting, I guess I would say, came right up to us, grabbed us by the hand, and started putting a bracelet on us. And I immediately said no. And I said, Grace, no. And she took the bracelet that they were already tying around her wrist and just threw it to the ground, and we walked away. So I was so glad we knew to say no then, because I don't know what their motive was there. I don't know if they were marking us or if they were going to try and get money for this bracelet or what the idea was. But I was so glad that I had that no in me to just say no to them and walk away. It's not always that easy, though. We have to learn to set boundaries and say no and stand up for yourself. And that can be scary, especially in different relationships that we have where we're maybe fearing, a little guilt, or we're in a position of subordinate, we're subordinate to a superior or something like that. There are situations that can be very scary to say no. The guilt, the self-doubt, and setting priorities can make people pleasers like me feel a little selfish or uncaring, or even feel a little too full of themselves and saying no. And so people pleasers, if you're a people pleaser like I am, we have to learn to take care of ourselves, and we have to learn that that isn't a selfish thing to do. And just because Susie over there is busy and she has a full schedule and she's doing this, that, and the other thing, doesn't mean that Susie is eating a healthy diet, or that she's getting her exercise, or she's getting her sleep. And so setting those boundaries and learning when to say yes to things that bring you joy and to say no to those things that don't really is good for your overall health as well. But before we get to those 5 tips to say no, those 5 helpful tips on saying how to say no, let's look at what yes really means. So for me, yes means saying yes on purpose. So before you can say yes, you have to know what your own values are, what your priorities are. The best way I have learned to do that is to create a personal mission statement. And then I use that personal mission statement to filter all my decisions through. It's interesting. With each decision, I ask myself, okay, does this align with my mission? Does this meet my values, my priorities? And if it's a no, then I know I have to say no to that decision. And it just makes it easier. So you have to say yes on purpose. You have to know what those values and those priorities are before you can make the choice to say yes or no. And, for me, like I said, making a personal mission statement has been very helpful in that. You might have other ways that you set your own values and priorities so you know better how to make decisions to say yes and no. And then when you say yes to those things that are in line with your mission and your values and your priority, doing them will bring you joy. You only can say yes to those things that you are willing to do with joy to be healthy in those decisions. So say yes on purpose. Next, say yes without guilt or fear. There's a big deal out there about fear of hurting somebody else's feelings. But honestly, we all hurt people, even those people that we love unintentionally. by our decisions and our choices. And you have to understand that hurting someone is very different than harming someone. And if the only reason that you're saying yes is because you have a feeling that you would hurt somebody's feelings or because of guilt or fear, then I would encourage you to say no, because saying yes to something you don't want to say yes to will only lead to stress, which is never a good thing. Stress is hard on you emotionally and physically, and saying yes to someone just because you're afraid you hurt their feelings is not going to be good for your relationship. Take that person aside and talk to them. That person's response to your decision is their responsibility. And if their feelings are hurt, have a conversation with them and explain to them what your priorities and your values are. Tell them you're sorry that their feelings have been hurt, but encourage them to make a choice in line with their own values and priorities. Their response is not your responsibility, and you don't have to make them feel bad, and you don't mean to make them feel bad, but you have to make choices based on your own values and priorities. If you're saying yes to get people to like you, you will end up draining yourself and spinning your wheels and running out of time to do those things that bring you joy. So never say yes or out of guilt or fear. Always say yes without guilt or fear. And then thirdly, saying yes to this means saying no to that. Stephen Covey once said, saying yes to one thing means saying no to another, and that's why decisions can be hard sometimes. Because if you're saying yes to something you don't want to do, that means oftentimes what you do want to do is getting pushed aside. You can only be in one place at a time, so only say yes when you know that that place is right where you should be, when it's in line with your values and your priorities. Think of it this way: could there be somebody else who might step up? Maybe that someone would feel joy in doing this task or making this choice. So when you say no, you may be allowing somebody else a great opportunity to say yes and to do it with joy. The world doesn't always have to rely on you. Boy, that's hard for me to say because I always say yes, I'm a people pleaser. This is something that I have to work on all the time. So saying yes to this means saying no to that, and keep that in mind. Now that we know some of the ways that we need to say yes, let's talk about 5 helpful tips to say no. First of all, you can be a kind-hearted, loving person and say no. Say no with kindness. For example, you could say, this sounds like a great opportunity, but I have to pass. Thank you for considering me. You can say it nicely. You don't just have to be brusque and say no. You can say it very nicely. There are kind ways to say no. Secondly, say it immediately. When you know your values and your priorities, you know right away whether this is going to line up with them or not. So say it immediately. It's going to be much better for your relationship with that person in the long run if you say no right when it's asked, rather than kind of dragging it out, giving false hope, stringing out a long-term letdown basically for that person. Say no immediately. Make the decision based on your values and your priorities. So say it with kindness, say it immediately, and thirdly, say it briefly. You don't have to give an explanation. This is something my mom tells me all the time. You don't have to explain yourself when you're telling someone no. It's not really something that is required. You can just simply say, sorry, I can't help you with that, and leave it at that. Or no. Somebody said no is a complete sentence, and I guess it is. You can just say no, but say it nicely. Say it with kindness. Jesus tells us in Matthew 5, chapter 5, verse 37, all you need to say is simply yes or no. Anything beyond this comes from the evil one. So Jesus tells us, say yes when you mean yes and say no when you mean no. And you can say it briefly. It doesn't have to be a drawn out long explanation. And number 4, you can always say not now. Sometimes you don't want to say no. Sometimes it's just not great timing and you'd like that opportunity in the future. So you could say, thanks, I'd love to volunteer at your event, but the timing this year is not good. Would you keep me in mind for next year's fundraiser? There you go. You can say it kindly. You can keep that as an option that's open, but it's just not good timing. And then number 5, we've talked about saying it with kindness. We've talked about saying it immediately. We've talked about how you can say it briefly, or you can say not now. And then finally, you've got to say it with conviction. Stand firm in your decision. When we decide a way that allows us to change our minds later, or when we kind of are wishy-washy and say, well, wait a minute, I changed my mind. I did say no, but I'm yes now, or vice versa. We tend to be a lot less happy with the decisions that we make. Make your decision, stand firm in your decision, and stay true to your conviction when you say no. Making the effort to focus on the good that will come from that saying no, and the opportunities that will open up to do something that will bring you joy. So if you still have a hard time saying no, I actually ran across a list of 50 examples of how to say no. And I will post a link to that here, so in case you're interested in that. But here are some examples. No, I need to prioritize my family right now. There, right there, is as a way to put your priorities and your values first. Another way to say no, unfortunately, that's just not possible. That's a nice way to say no. I really shouldn't this time, but thank you. That's another good one. And then this is a good one too. I like it. I hope you can understand. My answer is no. And just a simple no, kindly, briefly, immediately, to the point. When you say no to what you don't want to do and say yes to those things that line up with your values, with your priorities, you'll find yourself healthier, stronger, and in a better place to choose joy. Because joy doesn't simply happen to us. We have to choose joy every single day. Thanks for watching.